Welcome to Before the Peace. I am Jenna Moreland, and I'm here with producer and co-host Trey Lopashinsky. The songs you hear throughout this episode were written and performed by our very first guest, Gary Oker. We'd like to recognize that we are recording this episode on traditional Denizah land.
In this episode, we delve into intergenerational trauma caused by residential schools. The guest we have this month has wished to remain anonymous due to the fact that the stories he's telling are from family members of his and his perspective growing up with them in his life. In this episode, you will notice there's some long pauses from our guest, and I kept them in there to just kind of take you on this journey of what he's kind of going through and his thought process during this. It's a very emotional episode. I'm just letting you know that
It is. It was hard opening up these wounds, and I was tearing up most of the time. But it's also necessary, I think, for everybody to listen to this.
And that's why we're doing this podcast, and it wouldn't be possible without Troyer Ventures. Troyer has been serving our community and the energy industry with tank and vac trucks since 2000.
And they're built on principles of hard work, service, and community, and they're proud to offer the financial support to make this program possible. So thank you to everybody at Troyer Ventures. Let's get right into the episode. Thank you for listening. We wanted to have you on after hearing about your family's past with residential schools. So we're going to start right there. Which residential schools did your mom and auntie end up in?
I'm not going to say.
Okay. That's okay. Are they alive today?
Yes, they are, yep.
And you were raised by your mother?
No, I was raised by my grandma.
Okay. And what was that like?
Well, I was thinking about that on the drive-in. The other thing I was thinking about was my grandma was a loving woman. So I was spared the anger that my mom shared, or didn't, the love that she couldn't express because of what she learned in residential school. I was spared that because I was raised by a woman who loved me unconditionally. And so my brothers and sisters weren't spared that. And I recently asked my older brother, and did Mom ever hug you? And his answer was no. He was asked, he went to a conference, and he was told that your parents raised you in the best way you knew how. And my brother's answer to that was, he stood up and said, no, I don't believe that. But, he's come to grow and understand that Mom didn't have the tools, She didn't learn the loving way her mom had, because that was all stripped away when she went to residential school. And she was abused, and so she didn't learn how to show love properly to her own children. She just grew up and was very angry at the world, and she raised her children in that atmosphere. And so my brothers and sisters never got to experience what I did growing up, because I felt loved growing up. And, to this, my mom has learned, when you're abused in residential school and your ability to be a proper human is stripped away, because you're not taught how to love your children. You're abused, so you carry that with you. And my mom is in her early 70s, and she's still angry, still frustrated with life, because she's never been able to deal with those issues, and that still holds her back to this day. And she understands that, because she started. She went down south to a residential school survivor type, how to deal with your issues, because you went to residential school. She went down there and she was there for 2 weeks, and she came back, and bless her soul, she had all the tools. She understood what she needed to do. She talked about how she needs to deal with these issues and put them behind her so she can function normally. But that didn't last very long. It only lasted, on the month, and then it just faded away, and then she just slipped back to where she was before.
And when did she go? Like, how old was she?
To residential school?
No, when she went to this, where they taught her how to...
I'm going to say about 15 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
About the time that, I don't know when this all the residential school stuff started, but somewhere down there, my mom went to Quesnel to go to a survivor thing.
Okay.
To help her out. But they gave her the right tools, because she came back all excited, expressing how she needed to forgive and forget and put it behind her, but it didn't go nowhere.
Well, trauma, can actually change the child's brain development, even, the levels of cortisol, dopamine, serotonin. It can definitely affect the future ability to process stressful situations. And that, do you think that was obviously a big part of it, right? Just having that trauma and not understanding how to deal with the situations.
Yeah. Yeah. When you grow up, and I think when I read, the average age is 32 when people look deep, they look inside, and they go, okay, they don't understand why the type of people they are today until they get older and they're able to look back. And one of the things I share with a lot of people, and I've read in the past, is that your children's ability to be adults, they learn between ages of 3 and 8. 75 or 80% of how they're going to be as adults are learned in that 4 or 5 year span of their life. And so if you grow up mistreated and angry and beaten, you're not able to express love properly as an adult. And it's so difficult, to put it all in when you're older. Because when you get to that point and you realize that I'm the type of person because of the past, of what happened to me in the past, that's when you're at a paradox in your life. You either decide I'm going to stay messed up or I'm going to change. I'm not going to allow the past to control my future anymore. And then you look inside and you start dealing with the hurts and the pains and the anger. And, I had no clue as a young man when I married my wife. I had no clue how to be a husband. I had no clue how to be a father because none of that was taught to me properly. So when I married my wife, and I read so many books because I wanted to be different. I didn't want to be the same person my dad was. And I wanted to treat my children differently. So I read so many books. I would read a book and maybe glean 1 chapter, 2 chapter from that book and try to bring it into my life. And then I'd read another book and read another book. I read boxes of books because I wanted to be a better person. And when I met a beautiful woman, and we both wanted to raise our children in a good home, and we both knew that we needed help. We couldn't live the life we grew up with, and we wanted to raise our children in good homes, so we did what we could, and we both left our families and formed our family. And my wife and I, we both became adults together. We both helped each other through the pain that we were in, dealing with the emotions, learning how to be a dad. Now, one thing I share, like, because if you grew up in a home where your mom and dad read to you, it's going to come natural for you to read to your children. But when you grow up in a home where nobody read to you, and when I share the story a lot, so I'm not going to share who I am out here, but you'll probably read this story or hear about it, because I talk about this a lot. When my daughter was 3, and I knew in my heart that I should start reading to my children, but no one had ever done it to me, and I just knew I needed to do it. I needed to read to my children, and I would literally force myself off the couch, after work, you'd lay on the couch there. I'd force myself up, and it was like I was lifting weights off my feet. Each step just seemed heavy as I walked to the bedroom to read to my daughter, and it was difficult to read to my own child because it wasn't natural, and but I needed to break that cycle so that they could raise their children differently. And if I didn't set the example, they were just going to be as messed up as I was inside. So I read to my child, and I read to the other children. But it took probably 6 months before it became natural, to read to my own kids. It just, now I wanted to. But it wasn't like that right away. It was a struggle to break that cycle, because we can hold on to things forever, or we can deal with them and move on with our lives. And but we all, I like to think that I did right by my kids. They're all responsible adults.
So when did you first hear the term intergenerational trauma? Do you remember?
I learned that way before, like that mid-20s.
Okay.
And when I started, I was being taught that you need to deal with the emotions of what happened in the past in order for you to truly understand who you are. And it was back then I started dealing with emotions and just, I was 32. I knew I should forgive my mom when I was 22, but I couldn't do it. I held on to it for so long. I knew that I needed to do it, go to my mom and dad and say, forgive me for hating you. And I held on to that for 10 years. I knew I needed to do it when I was 22 years old to help myself grow, but I couldn't. I just couldn't let it go. And, I used to call my mom and dad the sperm donor and egg donor, because that's all they did for me. They didn't raise me, so that was my term I used. And but after I forgave, I went to my mom and dad and asked them to forgive me. Whether they accepted it or not was not on me. It was on them. It was time for me to move on. I did my part. But I've learned to love my mom and dad. In the end, I'd learned to love them. And that took a lot. And I forgave them. I asked them to forgive me. I put it behind me. And I learned to love my parents. But that's just one of the steps that I had to take.
It seems like sorry for interrupting. It seems like you're very self-aware, very like cognizant of like your surroundings and what's going on and like in yourself. Before we started recording, you were kind of talking about other people in your life who weren't so lucky because, trying to unpack what you talked here, you even said like 32 is the mark where, most people kind of find who they are. It seems like you found who you were, but you kept growing. But there's some people out there that aren't doing that even in the later stages of their life. If you just kind of want to talk about some of the, other people in your life as well and,
yes.
and what they went through.
I met with this one lady at the restaurant in town. And she was telling her story, and she was whispering it like she was afraid that the person beside her would hear her, and she's in her 70s, and she was afraid, like, it was almost like she was afraid they were going to scoop her away and take her to residential school where they took her brothers and sisters. So she was whispering it across the table to me. She said there was 7 of them, brothers and sisters, and their mom and dad said they're going to come. But when they come, I want you kids to be ready. When we say run and hide, go find the best hiding place that you can when they get here. So they showed up. See, a lot of time when you hear the stories, they don't say, oh, the Catholic priest and the cops came. They just say they. That's how they turn them. When they came, Mom and Dad said, run and hide. So all 7 children went run and hid. They found 5 of them. And then they threw them in the back of the truck where they herded us like cattle, our ancestors. They threw the 5 in there, and they were arguing with her mom and dad, and this lady could hear them screaming at her mom and dad, and where's the other ones? And they said, all we have is 5. They said, no, we know you have more. Where are they? And her mom and dad are screaming back, no, we only have 5. You got all our children. And her mom and dad are screaming, and in the end, they drove away. So the 2 never made it to residence school, but she did hear them tell their mom and dad, these 5 will come back in the future sometime, but none of them ever made it back. They might have been part of the 215, I don't know, because that's where they got sent down south. So none of those 5 children made it back, and the 2, she said she just never seen them again. And that was her story, and she was whispering it because she didn't want no one else to hear. And so she grew up without her brothers and sisters because she never saw them again. So the reason I share some of these stories is because there's a lot of people out there who ignorant of what happened in the past, and you hear, oh, just get over it. These people should just get over it. Then I want to share the stories, and I start opening up, and I start telling them stories of the abuse, and it helps to open people's eyes. I have a friend, I was talking about a couple earlier, brother and sister, who never opened up till their 80s, till the 215 were discovered about what happened in residential school. And one of the men, or one of the guys was, when the 215 were discovered, he finally was able to at least start talking about what happened in residential school. And the anger, the guilt that came with in residential school, where he was, the priest impregnated a lot of Indian girls, and they had babies. And this man, they forced them to grab these brand new babies and throw them in the incinerator. So he became an alcoholic. He held it all inside. He couldn't talk about it. He just felt so ashamed being asked to participate, to do that, or forced to do it. And his sister was abused in residential school, but she dealt with it differently. She held it all in. She became the anchor of the family. Or he became an alcoholic, and he would just run and go drink for a while. And her door was always open for him to come back and feel loved. She was always there for him. She was the anchor. She didn't. And it wasn't until recently she was able to start talking about what happened there too. And she kept it hidden. But she was always the anchor. She showed her daughter unconditional love, and her daughter's a beautiful person. You know, she was able to hold it in and just keep it there. And you see the abuse of the trauma of residential school. When you look around, you actually look around, you know, where I grew up, 80%, I don't know if it's that high or not, but it was high. Every home, their alcoholism was rampant back where I grew up, and that's how they dealt with it back then. Just to hide it, get drunk, beat each other up, whatever it took. And so, you know, when you get the horrors that you hide inside, you know, a lot of people don't ever want to talk about it, and have never, even to this point, have never been able to talk about it. The brave have gone up, and, you know, they wrote books about who they were and how they were abused, but there's so much stories that have never been told because these people to this day don't want to open up. They don't want to talk about what they went through in residential school, and you know, there's so much pain and so much anger and frustration out there that people hold on to it for so long. And I was blessed because only in one aspect was the lady that raised me never went to residence school. She didn't know any English. So, you know, bingo and sunyas or money, but she didn't know much English. So I had to learn our native language just so I could communicate with her. And I loved it. I know I can sit down with elders. I can't talk to them very well in my language, but I can understand what they're saying to me. And I can't speak to them because I try anyway, but I put my creed together the way it sounds to me, and the elders just laugh at me and say, well, we know what you're trying to say, but you're not saying it properly, but we understand what you're trying to say. But, you know, there's other stories of one man went to residential school, and he's another guy who wasn't able to share until the 215, and that one, I'm just thinking, no, that cuts too close. I can't share that story. But we grow up over time, and one of the keys in my life to help me to function was to learn to love myself, just to find out who I was. And I was blessed with a beautiful woman who helped me as we searched together on how to better ourselves. You know, we talked so much about the angers and the hurt. And the thing that you can't do is you can't help another person get to that point. They have to learn to get there. We can be there beside them, but we can't get them to that point where they need to learn to look inside to find out who they are individually. You know, when we learn to show love in different forms, you know, it's you better ask me another question.
So, well, one of the questions that I did want to ask you, so did you have some resentment towards your Indigenous culture growing up? Just no? So you embraced it fully?
I always knew I was Métis.
Okay.
Yeah. And I never had I always knew who I was. You know, I was much loved by my grandma. And, you know, at 17, my grandma took me to the window and she gave me some advice. And I don't know how to say it exactly in my language, but if I tell the story, I want to talk about how she said it. And she said, "Kigas kakyo ni okuta handuigata. Kigas kakyo an well for muikia. Kake kiatuske for your family. Kake atuske." And my mom never met my wife to be, but the advice she gave me that day was I want you to look up and down the street. A lot of our Indian people are on welfare, but not you. I want you to work hard for your family. I want you to work hard and provide for your family. And again, I'm not sharing who I am, but people will know by this. I got hurt when I was 19. I can't lift my right arm off the table, even right now. I ran a saw for 20 plus years. I cut trees, I fell, I bucked with an arm and a half. And I always thought about Grandma's words. I need to work hard for my family. I need to supply. I need to do the best I can. And so I went to work. I did the best I can. You know, I was on one when I first started working after I got hurt, and I started trying to get back into the workforce. I went to work on one construction site, and they nicknamed me Lightning. Not for how fast I could work, because I had to learn to hammer with my left, and I was missing the nail a lot. So they nicknamed me Lightning, because lightning never strikes the same place twice. So that's what they nicknamed me on the job. But it's so Mom always taught me to take pride in who I was. My mom is my grandma. That's when I say mom.
Okay.
That's who I'm talking about. And Mom always taught me to take pride in who I was. And we were Métis. I was never ashamed of who I was. You know, I always knew who I was. Even to this day, when people try to change my name and tell me I don't know, First Nations, all these different terms they got. And I tell people, when I grew up as an Indian, I'm still an Indian today. That's just me.
So growing up in the Peace region, like obviously things were different when you were growing up versus when your kids were growing up. What did you worry about when your kids were when you were raising your kids? What did you worry about, like sending them to school and, racism and all that kind of stuff? What did you lose sleep overnight? I guess is what I'm asking, because I definitely lose sleep thinking about my kids. So I imagine probably the same for you.
I'm not. No. I guess my biggest, again, like you said, you're always constantly growing. And I didn't worry a lot about what the kids did, because I felt my wife and I did a good job in preparing them to go to school. But when my daughter came home, grade 4, grade 5, and she showed me a report card, and she was quite upset. I didn't get any A's. You didn't get any A's. And she was so disheartened that she didn't get any A's. And I said, okay, I'll go to the next parent-teacher meeting. So I went to the next parent-teacher meeting. And the very first thing this teacher says to me was, I don't give out too many A's. And I said, oh, yeah. And I didn't ask him if it was race-related or anything. I just said, I think you need to reevaluate the way you're grading your children there. I said, because you can discourage a child from trying hard when they feel like they've earned an A and you give them a B or a C. And you can actually discourage children from doing their best. So this teacher said, well, let's go through our schoolwork together. So we went through all our schoolwork, 90%, 93%, 95%, 87%, 94%. It was...
Wow, good for her.
A work, right? And after a half hour going through all her schoolwork, he was fidgeting in his chair. I think he thought I was going to slap him or something. I wasn't. I wasn't angry. I just wanted him. I just trying to point something out to him. When we were done, he looked at me and said, I think I made a mistake here. I said, I'm not asking you to change your grade. I'm just asking you to reevaluate the way you grade these children. That's all I'm asking. Next report card, my daughter came home, she had 4 or 5 A's. And she said, do you know what, Dad? He gave all the other students A's that deserved it too. So it wasn't just her she was doing it to. He was doing it to. It was the other kids. And speaking up for her helped the others also. I don't know. I just felt I needed to speak up there.
Yeah, you sound very supportive, and I think that kind of goes to the stories you've been telling as well, just lending an ear and just willing to listen and talk with them and hear their stories about residential schools, and talking about it, I guess, will be the kind of first step to healing in a way. And if you're willing to listen to them and they're willing to tell you, I think it's a very good thing what you're doing.
I think what we need to do as younger people is we need to visit the elders more. We need to go and let them tell their stories, because so many have stories that they've never been able to share because no one's been there willing to listen. And they want to talk about it, but nobody comes by. I used to visit this older Indian woman. I think she was 82, and she told me one day, she said, I'm really happy you come by. I said, why? She said, because I can talk about the stories that I remember. While I still remember them, I'm able to tell these stories to you. Another elder asked me, he said, I'm really glad you come by. He said, because my own kids don't want to learn from me, but you come by and you want to learn from me. I'm really happy to teach. and I was taking Cree lessons from him. And he said, I'm really happy to teach because my own kids don't learn. And built in, and I tell this to so many people, built in every human being is the desire to pass on knowledge. We all have the desire to teach, whether it was teaching our children to crawl, or teaching somebody how to run a computer properly. We all have the desire. It's innate in each of us to teach somebody something. But if we're never asked questions, we're never going to teach. So we need to ask questions. We need to go to the old people and ask them questions because they want to pass on what they know. They might not want to talk about some things that happened in their life, but they want to pass on something.
Did you express that to your kids? Did they go and visit elders?
I used to take my kids with me. And after a while they said, Dad, I don't want to go anymore, because we would go visit for 2-3 hours at a time. After a while, we'd be walking through the mall. I remember one instance, we're walking through Edmonton Mall, and my kids, they were teenagers, young teenagers, and they see this old guy sitting on the steps, sitting on the bench up ahead, and they go, Dad, don't do it. Because they know what's coming. Dad, don't. Let's just keep walking. And I looked at him and said, you kids will know where I'll be in a couple hours. You can come by. Dad, really? I sat down, said hi to this elderly gentleman. I sat there with him for a couple hours, but I did that so many times that the kids were just used to it. But because I was always trying to teach them that it's right to talk to elders, right to ask them questions, and everybody, whether you talk to a farmer, you learn stuff that you didn't know before. You talk to a cowboy, you talk to a driller. They all have stories, and they all want to talk about something, And even if they've been to residential school, they don't always want to open up about it, but they'll tell you, I went to residential school, and they'll start talking a little bit about it, but then it's not a place where I want to ask them questions about it. If they want to open up about it, I'll listen. That's all I can do.
Because if they mention that, most likely the person they're speaking to instantly knows to kind of, okay. Yeah. Let them
if they want to open up, let them do it. And so, I just taught my kids to listen. That's all we can do.
Where did you learn that from? From your mom?
From my grandma.
Yeah.
Grandma, mom, yeah.
Well, we sat in silence a lot because I didn't understand her a lot. I didn't know how to talk to her. I didn't know the language enough to communicate with her. So, but I knew she loved me. So that was the important word. My mom and my cookum and I, we went on a date together. And that's what when I got older, I realized it was a date for me and her. We couldn't communicate very well, but she could play bingo. And back then, I was 9 or 10. I was allowed to go to bingo halls back then. Wednesday night, that's where she'd take me. I'd go play bingo with my cookum.
What does cookum mean? Is
grandma.
that grandma? Okay, and that's in Cree?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd play bingo with my cookum. Just her, something she enjoyed doing with me was taking me to bingo. She didn't go to the movies, didn't go to the swimming pool. She took me to bingo. Didn't take me picnicking, but that's what we did together, and I remember those are fond memories of my mom. And and
so why do you think it's so important to listen to the elders?
Because they want to share. They want to tell stories. And we're a storytelling people. And if we don't listen to stories, how can we pass on knowledge? And our people are storytellers. And, I used to tell my kids, you need to go visit your auntie. Because auntie knew family history from 30, 40 years ago. I said, and I'll tell my nieces and nephews, you need to go visit her. Sit at her feet for 2 or 3 days and listen to her stories, because she has so many stories about your history, your family history. You need to go listen to her. And if they took the time to go visit her, Auntie would just tell stories, because she did the genealogy search and where we're from and where we lived and where our ancestors lived, and that's how we learned. Like, she didn't write nothing down, so she's gone now, so that's gone. Unless you were there visiting her and listening to her stories. But she had so much knowledge. She was willing to share with anybody who'd come, but people have to make that choice themselves, whether they want to learn.
So being raised by your grandma, did you see your birth mom very often, or was it like...
She lived 4 houses away.
Oh, wow. Okay. And you knew she was your birth mom, and like your siblings were there?
I always knew they were there, yeah.
Okay. And when did you learn about that she was in a residential school? Like, how did that change your perspective on...
I don't think I learned that until I was in my 20s.
Okay.
To help me understand, because I needed to know why they gave me away. I needed to know why I was the one that felt unloved. Yet my brothers and sisters felt the same way, but they were raised by my parents. I needed to understand. So you start paying attention to what happened in your parents' life. You know, you look back generations, and you don't do that as a child. You don't look back at, why your mom and dad are the way they are. My dad never went to residential school, but his dad died in World War II. So he didn't know how to be a father. And my sister and I, we talked about that the other day, where one of the things that my dad was an excellent teacher when he was teaching others. He could teach once, twice, 3, 4 times. But when he would teach his own children, it was just once. Now you know. Don't ask me again. He had no patience to teach his own children, but he could teach others with extreme patience. And I find myself always worrying about treating my children the same way. Like, I don't want to... Do you understand that? I don't want to just get mad at them and teach them and say, leave me alone. But I just want my children to know that when I go home to meet my wife, I just want people to be able to say that there was a man that loved his family. Doesn't matter. Nothing else matters.
Well, I imagine they can feel the love, because I can feel it just like sitting here. Like, you love them so much, so I'm sure they know. So I guess we can go into our last question.
I'm trying not to cry, so I asked her to go to...
I know. Yeah, I'm trying not to cry. Oh,
I was sitting here looking down like, trying not to. But yes, Jenny.
Yeah, we can just go into the last question, which is, what does reconciliation mean to you?
That's such a difficult question. And it means something different to everybody. And but I don't know what it means to everyone else. But I know, for me, reconciliation is learning to love myself so that I can teach others to learn to love themselves. And it's not, I don't just teach this to Indian people. I meet a Norwegian, a guy from England, a guy an African. I tell them the same thing. You need to learn to love yourself so you can learn to love your children. And so we reconciliation is when we can look back. I don't know how to put it in words, and I don't want to offend anybody or anybody out there. But we can look back and say, I raised my children right. I did the best I could. I read a book when I was 32 years old, and it was called Stop Using Your Past as an Excuse for the Way You Are Today. And like I talked about earlier, that I was at a paradox where I needed to go to my parents and ask them to forgive me for hating them so that I can reconcile and be right with them so that I could be right with my kids, be right with my wife. And that, to me, that's reconciliation, is making things right in my own home so that my kids have a better chance at life than I did. You know, they don't have to have all the struggles and the pain and the hurts that I had. And their children will have a better chance, and so on. You know, we can carry this anger and pass it on to our children. And it doesn't do them any good for them to be angry, and we just need to forgive. We'll never forget, but we need to be able to forgive and just share love with each other. I don't know how to put it any other way.
No, I think you said it very well. I really do.
And it's all good. Well, I made it to the end.
Well, thank you very much for sitting down with us. I know it wasn't easy, and I really appreciate it. We really appreciate it. And, yeah, thank you.
Mercy. Jonathan.
Make sure you guys subscribe to Before the Peace using your favorite podcast app or at www.energeticcity.ca/podcasts.
If you have a guest or program idea, email beforethepeace@moosefm.ca.
If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health or trauma, you can call the Crisis Intervention Helpline 24/7, dial 211 in British Columbia, or text HOME to 686868 in Canada to text with a trained crisis responder.
If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, please call the Addictions Treatment Helpline 1-800-663-1441.
If you want to learn more about residential schools, please visit reconciliationcanada.ca.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Honestly, you know by now why we called it an emotional one.
Yes, and tune in next month because it's going to be a good one.